Good afternoon, everybody. I should say, of course, for North America, good morning. We have people from British Columbia, from Montana, so it's morning there. Today we'll have the pleasure to welcome Don Presant, and Don will introduce a very interesting new way to align badges to open framework. So Don, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric, and thanks for making this time available. I'm joined today, those of you who know me and know that I'm with CanCred by Learning Agents. We'll talk just a tiny little bit about that. I'm joined today by Stephen Forth of Ibbaka Talent, who has a very innovative approach to skills and a very innovative platform, and that's what we're basically talking to you about today. Stephen, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
No, just thank you very much, Eric and Don, and we are excited to be working with Open Badge Factory and CanCred, and we look forward to adding value to the community and to learning from you.
Great, thank you. And we often like to say in this community that badges are connectors, and actually Stephen and I were connected by David Porter, who's many of you know is a visionary in the international scene, and brought micro-credentials and badges to eCampus Ontario, and is now engaged in doing that with the Commonwealth of Learning. So connections and trust, you actually see that in action here. Okay, so I am going to go into my presentation, and I want to frame things a bit, first of all, by saying that this solution we're talking to you today certainly meets the needs of Open Badge Factory, Open Badge Passport, the global solution, and by extension, the dedicated passports you see on the right there. I just have a few examples of them: Big Connexion, HPass, and Badgeable. But we're doing this initially for the Canadian context, and here is that same setup in Canada for Canadians, and that's our focus with CanCred. And we work with eCampus Ontario and their dedicated passport. So that's just a bit of framing. It's about skills, and this some of you here in this group today were in Bologna, the Epic in Bologna, where we were talking about T-shaped skills. Brian Matthews, this is a very famous diagram. The idea that vertical skills in ICT, skills in Java or Python or whatever are not enough. You have to be able to work with people. You need those human skills. So Strata Institute starts talking about the need for changing these and being dynamic and future friendly with this. And so they talk about human skills for a 100-year work life, where you keep on having to upgrade yourself. I'm starting to talk about a sort of a more holistic view of those T-shaped skills, where the interaction between them starts becoming a lot more obvious. So you start thinking in terms of context transfer and fluency across domains, and what's core and what's additional. So all of that makes skills like these a bit like stacking jellyfish, and we're faced with legacy frameworks that are things like the Ontario Essential Employability Skills, which are actually based on wonderful research in Canada, nicely packaged in Ontario, but it's a sort of a static framework, and people are sort of pushing at the edges of this right now. But in the meantime, every Ontario college has to align programs to the Ontario Essential Employability Skills, talk about how their programs are supporting these. So what we have today, in one sense, those of you who are using Open Badge Factory know you can set up an alignment manually. And we did this initially with the Ontario Essential Employability Skills, but it's just a web page, just a table on a web page. It's not a granular way of pointing to, for example, a sub-skill within numeracy. And those of you working in Europe know that you can link out to the ESCO framework, and that's through an API, through their public API, and you can start identifying skills. It's a monster database. It's not wonderfully well articulated, I would say. I guess the transversal skills are sort of better off than some of the other ones. So you can get lost in it, and it's difficult to come up with independent ways of arriving at the same skill that different people can get at, and start comparing their credentials and other resources with each other. So what we did was use some Ontario funding through a partnership with St. Lawrence College, which is in Eastern Ontario, and working with Shopify, which many of you would have heard of, is a bit of a competitor to Amazon these days, but we don't make a lot of noise about that. And so CanCred can now speak to skills frameworks within the Ibbaka talent server. So the Ibbaka maintains this server where competencies can be developed and can be remixed, and Stephen's going to talk to you about that. What we've done is a very simple proof of concept where we put those simple frameworks, and as step one, we say, I can point to this, you can point to this, you can point to the same thing. Instead of typing in manually the skill that I might type in differently than you, we're both pointing to the same thing. And you'll see there it's not just skills, it's the sustainable UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that was actually added by St. Lawrence College because they're starting to align their programs to the SDGs in addition to the essential employability skills. So one of the subtexts of that is you can have multiple alignments, each of which can add value to the credential. So this is step one, the proof of concept. And future phases, we're going to be setting up a way for people to put up other open competency frameworks, open competency models, and Stephen can talk a little bit about their philosophy of open competency models that help bring us to them for this solution. And then other frameworks that are out there that might be entrepreneurship, language frameworks, ICT frameworks, even things like the ONET, this from Career One Stop, the advanced manufacturing stack of skills. And then beyond that, it would be an open resource. It's not just for badges, not just for CanCred or Open Badge Factory. It's to set it up as an open resource, much like some of the other ones that are starting to appear in the ecosystem that people like Simona, who's with us here today, can talk about. So we intend to be compatible with this, to be part of the ecosystem and play with this, but starting from a Canadian viewpoint, and then other people can come from European viewpoints and start from their European viewpoints and build out from there. Essentially starting simple and then building out in organic ways that can basically flex to meet evolving needs. So one of the things I'm saying is we can also align badges after issue. I'll make that point, and Eric's going to be talking about something called wiki badges a bit later on, and I was just thinking this morning that might be something worth looking at. So using this model, we're going to rebrand it, but let's just call it Ibbaka Talent for now. And so instead of reaching out to ESCO, we're going to reach out to the Ibbaka Talent server. We can drill right down. This is actually an improved interface where it's hierarchical. You can drill down to levels. So in this case, I'm picking communication, which would include those sub-skills. If I wanted to, I could drill further and pick, for example, the skill of presenting as opposed to the competency of communication. Shopify has developed, they've become remote by default. And that was part of the COVID response, but they were already very much a remote company because they're essentially global and it's about online sales. So they have developed a set, or they are in the process of drafting a set of remote working skills. And these are some of them right here. And we've made it possible to talk about either the growth mindset skills or what they call the operational skills, and then drilling down within that. Where things would be going is the idea of what if you could mash up the Ontario Essential Employability skills and Shopify's remote working skills. There's already a huge amount of overlap. A lot of it is, collaborating with people online, and it's not just technical knowledge or knowledge of the platform. So these ways of working together, developing the skills of leadership, etc., these can be mashed up, remixed on the platform using the models that Ibbaka has developed. And then I mentioned the UN SDGs. So this badge is about making the world a better place. So just as Serge was talking some months back about gardening apprentices, not saying I have these skills, gardening apprentices would say, I want to work in these areas. This is how I want to make a difference in my life. This is my mission in life. And they can align their own credentials to that. And then obviously issuing organizations, academic institutions can align their programs to that. So it can come from two directions. So just a quick preview of what it looks like in a badge. And just to make the point, it's not just skills, it can be goals, it can also be standards. And I have some ideas along those lines that we're going to be developing with a couple of partners. Could be domains, so like those ESCO domains I was talking about, and Stephen was mentioning yesterday, geographies, and we already have geolocation of badges. So there can be some very interesting ways of aligning and mixing and triangulating some of these alignments. So just to make the point, this is an older slide we have. If you align your credentials in various ways and you find ways of endorsing the results of those alignments with third parties, you have what might be the secret sauce. And our secret sauce is ketchup, mayonnaise, and a little bit of mustard. That's a joke. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Stephen, who's going to go in a little more detail about their modeling of competency models and the whole open competency model philosophy. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Don. So when Ibbaka says an open competency model, we mean open in three different ways. So the first and most important one is that the competency model is open for people to both use and evolve at no charge. And we do this through a Creative Commons license. And our commitment is that anyone who wants to distribute a competency model under a Creative Commons license, we will host that model at no charge on the Ibbaka platform. So that's the first part of being open, that the model must be available to both distribute but also modify through a Creative Commons license. The second part of being open is that the models must be open to evolve. I think competency models and competency frameworks have a bit of a bad reputation in many areas. I was speaking with the Chief Human Resources Officer at a rather large organization recently, and he sort of sighed and said, "Oh, I'm suffering from competency model PTSD." And I think that's actually fair, because historically competency models have been large, burdensome, cumbersome things. You may know the old joke about implementing an ERP, an enterprise resource planning system, is like taking concrete and pouring concrete over your business processes. Well, competency models felt a bit like that in the past, and that's something that we're trying to break open. So the second part of a competency model being open is that it has to be open to being remixed and combined. And because each of us as individuals, as organization, combines our skills and competencies in different ways and has our own unique needs. And each badge may want to draw on competencies from different places. And then the third part of being open, and we'll see this on the next slide, is competency models have to be open to skills and ideas bubbling up, and bubbling up from the bottom. So some of the open, actually, could you just go back? Sorry, Don, could you go back one slide? I just want to mention some of the competency models that we are currently working on. So I happen to be quite active in the global design thinking movement. I worked with Roger Martin and IDEO on some of the original ideas for design thinking, and I am the manager of the LinkedIn Design Thinking Group, which has 165,000 or so members. So one of the areas that we thought we would start with developing an open competency model for design thinking. Other areas that we work in are customer success and pricing expertise. So we're developing our own open competency models there. But we're also working with Royal Roads, which is a university in Victoria, BC, which is partnered with organizations around the world to create an open competency model in adaptation to climate change, which is a very important theme that aligns well with a lot of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is and we are open to adding additional competency models, such as the one from Shopify. We are over time, and we are talking with different partners about how we do that. Okay, now we can go on to the next slide, Don. So another key thing about competency models, and this will be obvious, I think, to people in this community, but it's not obvious to everyone, is that competency models connect with many other things. And badges are a very powerful way to do that, because competency models are a way to connect badges as credentials, badges to skills. They can connect to learning resources. And very, very importantly, badges are a powerful way to connect competency models and skill profiles. So briefly, a skill profile is a representation of an individual's or a team's or an organization's or a community's or a geography's set of skills and how they are being applied. And as Don said earlier, badges are a very important way of connecting people, as are skills. And this is, I think, the important way that badges and skills become aligned. So we really see competency models as being things that are open, that evolve, and that connect with many different parts of the ecology. So you may have read the recent World Economic Forum reports on reusable skills and the positioning that skills are the currency of the workforce. If skills are the currency of the workforce, then competency models are how skills get organized, and badges are how skills get celebrated and represented. So Don, do you have more? Yeah, so assessment and validation, are I think something that constantly comes up and certainly come up in the concept of badges. And our approach to assessment and validation is also as open as possible. So we do not think there is ever going to be one way to assess a person's level of expertise. So we are taking a very open approach in which assessment can be based on evidence. It can be based on examination and testing and assessments. It can leverage external certifications. It can take advantage of expert assessments or manager assessments. And the ones that we find, or the one that we find actually most powerful, is really peer assessment. In many cases, it's the people one works with who have the best insight into one's skills and expertise. And finally, self-assessment is also an important part of the picture.
Stephen, I'll just chime in to talk about the OBP passport platform supports post facto care and feeding of the credential. So you can, after you receive the credential, you can continue to add evidence to it. You can seek endorsements from particular people about how you earned this particular credential. And I'm starting to think that we should be looking for ways of aligning a credential after the fact, because you can't think of all the alignments before the fact. So there's a way of adding value as more becomes apparent as the story builds about the credential. So that could be the individual aligning their own credential potentially, or if somebody endorses it, they might be able to say, this is an example of communication, of design thinking, etc. So I'll just sort of wind up and actually turn my camera back on. Take the podium again. Just to say that next steps for us basically is to take this proof of concept and start to operationalize it. So we're going to rebrand it to a brand TBA and move the sort of riggins to a production server. So move the engine to a production server from the development server that it's on. We're going to complete the integration. There's some finishing touches in terms of integrating from factory to drill right into the Ibbaka talent database. So just some final bits and pieces there. A bit of massage, a bit of content massage, a few sort of minor UI UX things, and then move to sort of more like a beta version, developing the minimal viable product in community. Really work on the UI UX, because essentially we've harnessed two really good engines, but we haven't really configured it for that integration yet. We're going to seek more frameworks to put in there through various means, including today, solicitation today, which that's the next slide about, and then develop a governance model that will work and is sustainable. We have 2 or 3 options we're actively examining at the moment. And then move on from there, develop partnerships and a roadmap of innovating this to make it compatible with what's happening out there in the ecosystem system and what's relevant to the needs of people who are issuing badges and people who are earning them and developing their careers with them. I would come up and say that here are some ideas we have in mind. We've actually done very well in terms of presenting this. We can open to discussion now and take some comments, maybe revisit this and start adding elements to it based on ideas that come today.
Thank you very much, Don. Any questions?
It's a bit fast.
Awesome presentation.
I actually had a quick question. So just on the topic of remixing frameworks, that could certainly be something which is quite useful for the work that I'm doing. I just wonder that by remixing, by doing the remixing, does that dilute the recognizability, or at least the brand aspect of a certain badge or credential?
So I think that's a really interesting question, and there are many issues yet to be worked out here. I think that the badge or the credential is a layer on top of the frameworks. So I don't think that it has any impact on the on the badge itself. The badge needs to have its own recognition and its own power. And the fact that a badge draws on more than one framework may actually increase the recognizability of the badge itself. The area where I think one gets into, I don't like to say into trouble, but where there are governance issues, is that some people, for example, the Royal Roads team that developed the adaptation to climate change framework is very passionate about it, and might see certain remixings of it as not compatible with their goals and their vision. So this is why Don had the had called out the governance issue. So I think that there are, Ali, I think you've identified an important issue that's going to need to be covered under governance. But I think in terms of the badging aspect of it, it actually only makes badges more powerful and more compelling. that they draw from the, hopefully our goal is to have the best set of frameworks available on this system. So I think that is the path forward there. But does that answer your question?
It does. That was great. Thanks.
Okay, I can chime in a bit more here. Is to say that, and again, these are discussions that Steve and I are having and are just evolving. So he's not going to necessarily approve of what I say here. But it occurs to me that the chain of provenance is one issue where you say this comes from this comes from this, etc. So that's the CCBY part of it. It's by so-and-so and how far you want to go back with that. And then just to look at the whole CC Creative Commons tool set and say, okay, normally the default is CC BY. You could potentially allow CC BY NC, so no changes, and that could handle within the notion. And then it's a governance issue whether you want to allow that, but at least you have a framework that you're talking about in terms of whether you do want to allow changes in remixing and forking, or whether it has to remain. So for example, Brian Mathers with that T-shaped student, I would like to make that a T-shaped human, but I can't because it's NC, so it's CCBY NC. So that's an issue. However, you could have that framework, and then you could have your remixed version of it, and you're preserving both as separate alignments. So you could basically, here's the underlying alignment, and here's my add-on. A couple of ways you can dipsy doodle and bob and weave around the issue.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do.
Hey, Simone.
This is Simone. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
All right. I have like a ton of questions emerging, and they don't stop. But first of all, I really have a ton of gratitude for the work that you are doing with this. Certainly tackling one aspect that has been, alignment, I'm referring to, underutilized, and where there's clearly a lot of value. So as I'm, I guess, grappling with the idea of remixing, say, competence frameworks, which I think it's exciting, and to resolve that issue that comes with, as Ali was saying, some people may not be that happy that you go and remix their frameworks. There's probably a difference here on frameworks, competence frameworks that allow whoever designs the badge and learners to articulate, in a more appropriate way, the meaning of the badge, and without reinventing the wheel. So leveraging existing definitions, that it's great, that it's super valuable, that adds the quality to the quality of the badge and to the usability of the badge, and also for the verifiers. I mean, the third parties that you share them with. I guess, so those frameworks are, I think it's beautiful to remix them. You add nuances and granularity. Maybe when you start to look at aligning with quality assurance frameworks, or I guess different types of frameworks, accreditations and so on, that's where you would get people to frown upon it, saying, well, you're not, it feels like you're saying you're adding quality to their work, which to them is already quality assured, or it doesn't get any better than that, which is wrong. But hey, I guess there's a point there. But hey, these are called open badges, not just badges. So it's very much in line with the ethos, and given the possibility to linking out possibly to these frameworks, it's great. Now, the questions I had were a couple. One is, as I guess you remix a framework. I mean, if you are essentially, from say Open Badge Factory, you can cherry pick, right, different definitions. I mean, would you be able to publish then like a framework, the new framework that you're making up from there, or is the remixing and eventually publishing of a new framework happening on the, externally to the Open Badge Factory? And once that is published, does that become a thing that other can leverage?
Yeah,
I'll stop
answer
there.
that first, Don, and then you may want to go in. So lots of thoughts in there, Simone. Thank you. I'm going to focus on the last part because I have a very poor short-term memory, so that's what I'm focusing on. So I think that there are a number of different ways of addressing that, but basically, yes, we use a lot of evolutionary models as we think through this, and we actually try to apply some of the different ways that evolution works to competency frameworks. So species branch very successfully, and that's a good thing. So yes, and remixes of frameworks can create new frameworks that then take on a life of their own, and that's an excellent thing. And we want to make sure that that is supported. We've been talking a lot of alignment of badges with frameworks, but if you think of it, a sophisticated collection of badges is actually also a competency framework. So there's no reason that that this has to be one way. Well, first of all, at an organizational level, a badge should be publishable as a framework. Some badges will be so simple that that's not really needed, but there are some very sophisticated badges and badge collections that could be represented as a set of badges, but they could also be represented as a competency framework, and that goes two ways. And this goes back to Don's comment on which version of Creative Commons. My personal point of view at this time, and I believe I speak for Ibbaka, although Ibbaka is not just one voice, as Don knows from working with us, is that we are only willing to host competency models for free if they allow modification. So it's not just any Creative Commons license, it's Creative Commons licenses that allow allow change and adoption. I just want to bring up one other idea here, which is the assumption here is that competency models or competency frameworks are big, institutional or, big institutional things. But why? Why not have your own individual competency model? So I have a rich skill profile with, 500 or 600 different skills on it that are all connected in a skill graph. But why shouldn't I also have my own competency model that talks about the roles that I play in the community, that talks about the competencies and behaviors and skills that support those roles? So there's this assumption that that competency frameworks have to be big clump. I'm sorry, I'm letting some of my biases show through. I'm on the IEEE committee that works on standards for competency frameworks, which can sometimes be very frustrating. So, why not make these things lighter, and individual, so that they can bubble up? And, I may see, Don has a role as an innovator in an open source community. There's a lot I could learn from the competencies and skills that he sees essential to that. So I think that we want to get sort of a much more open and dynamic and free-flowing set of connections between individual skills, team skills, organization skills, the models that organize them, the badges that represent them, but also flowing back the other way. So I'll shut up there, but Don.
All right, I'm going to try and deal with it because, wow, I'm trying to keep all the structures in my head. So first of all, with standards, I agree with Stephen that if you're not going to allow, if you're going to put NC, maybe NC should be a value add. So, so if you might have a standard that's untouchable, although shareable, but somebody, an organization might make a claim against it. So they say this meets this, we say this meets this standard, and here's why we say that. And that links into what Bev Oliver was talking about with critical information summaries, saying, you know, what is the framework? Here's what we're trying to do. Here's how we meet the elements of this. So the organization, as they're issuing the credential, issuing the badge, they're making a claim. Okay, so that I think is defensible, and you have a structured way of examining it that you can look at. The other thing I would say is that in terms of remixing, we haven't thought through how much we want the API itself to do. Right now, it's just a picking API when you're creating a badge, whether you want to stay within factory and do it, or whether you just want to go around to the server itself. I suspect the server itself would have better tools to do that, and it's a lot easier to maintain. So that would be for that. And then what Stephen's talking about with the badges as a framework, I think it's awesome, because that really relates to the idea of that two-way thing. People, it's emergent learning. So it's like that IBM example where they say, what if you come up with a really good way of doing design thinking in Kuala Lumpur? How do you communicate that? Well, you make a badge, and then people collect around that badge and start learning from that cool shop in Kuala Lumpur, right? So that it's that emergent, that bubbling up thing, still working with the solid frameworks, the structure, and it's kind of like fiber in the resin, if you know what I mean. So there are some structural elements, and there's schema.org way up there, and there's other ways of having sort of anchor points, but you have a much more potential for a two-way flowing organic system as opposed to like a shrink-wrapped competency.
Okay, this is.
I do have more things, but I'll let someone else jump in. This is too interesting for me.
Please, Simone, if you have something to add.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a less exciting or maybe angle. As you were presenting, a couple of things came to mind. One is the case framework by IMS. So this sort of attempt to have kind of a clearinghouse or a mechanism to connect existing competence frameworks. My understanding is that's an attempt to really also connect them, but map them semantically, but by keeping them, I guess, separate though, without remixing. So I guess that came up. I don't know, have you looked into it? I mean, are you familiar with it? And is that been of any reference in your work as you've been looking at this?
Yeah, so this is I'll answer first, and then Don may want to weigh in. So the answer is yes. So we follow that work. And Simone, do you know Robbie Robson at EduWorks?
Yeah, well, and I'm also I have that IEEE thing on me, so I share some of the pain. Sorry, so that's where I know him from.
Yeah, so so I think that yes, I think that the IMS approach has a lot of merit, but I think that we have to be open to multiple approaches. I really see this as an evolutionary system in which all the different evolutionary functions are available. So mutations, the ability of ideas or whatever are, and we think of the atomic object here as skills. So the gene in these models is the skill, and how skills build together are important. How they mutate is important. How you get cross-pollination from different models and different people is also important. So I'm looking to create an ecology that is maximally open. I don't know if you've seen the notion of an association object. Have you seen that? So it's in the IEEE 1484.20.1. I'm embarrassed that I even know all those numbers. So that's the data model for competency definitions, and it has the notion of an association object. So if you're an RDF semantic web kind of person. It's actually an example of RDF reification, which is super interesting, but I am not at all sure how practical it is. So, you know, it's conceptually and technically super interesting. In reality, I cringe at the idea of trying to figure out how to implement it at scale. But you know, and there's a lot of work going. Yeah, there's a lot of things happening right in this world right now, and I think our goal should be open and accepting of them, rather than trying to drive one view through. I don't know if I answered that very well, Simona, but anyway, Don.
You added to it too. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Don. Yeah.
Just to say that what we're trying to set up here is something where it's like layers of reification, layers of solidity, right? So you start with some simple frameworks, and then the Ibbaka talent server, it's you know, the technologies they have are capable of ingesting and making sense and inferring things, so you can have more dynamic relationships happening, much of the way that MC is doing that now, and MC can be a source for this. And then other things can be a source. So Stephen's example about badges as competency frameworks, that's what popped into my head, is, you know, it presents a structure that can be inferred from, you know, implicitly by looking at the associations between the credentials and maybe some other evidence. So, but then you have something that people can use, that the rest of us can use, and all this weird stuff is going on in the background and hopefully is feeding into it and keeping things relevant. So there's stages of readiness for sharing in a way.
I have another question. It's in terms of the frameworks that are available. So I guess they need to be exposed or published as linked data to be able to, you know, be brought in. And so, I mean, how do you deal? And this is what all competence frameworks should be based. Full disclosure, I am on the ESCO maintenance committee, and I've been fighting this war. I mean, that's a great thing that ESCO is, you know, already doing it, but there's, say, DigComp on digital skills, Entracomp. I mean, they're not published as linked data, and now ONET has been, but very few are published as linked open data yet. So that may be an issue.
Yeah, it is, and we're going to, and let's, you know, the truth is that the vast majority of skill descriptions and competency frameworks are locked into PowerPoints and PDFs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the EES. I mean, we basically reproduced the EES inside the Ibbaka talent engine. That's how we did it.
Right.
So
I was wondering if there's, an option to say, as you remix the framework, you bring them in, you actually you link datafy them. So there's that process.
That's our, yes, that's part of our intent. So one of the things that I don't want to get too deep into the stack here, Simona. Maybe we can pick this up, you know, directly. But you know, Dawn was referring to, we have the ability to ingest documents, spreadsheets, PDFs, all sorts of different kinds of information, extract skills from that and connect those to a skill graph. So that's a sort of core part of our technology. We use it more in cases where there is no framework, or where people are interested in the future, rather than when there is a framework. So we are talking to ONET. One of the things I'm supposed to be doing this week is taking the ONET Advanced Manufacturing Competency Model and implementing it on the Ibbaka Talent Platform. So there's, there's a hierarchy, right? There's stuff that is fairly well structured, but it's sort of locked into conventional systems. There's stuff that's in Excel, either databases or Excel spreadsheets, and is fairly easy to ingest. But then a lot of the best ones, in fact, are locked up in PDFs and PowerPoints. I mean, sustainable development, not sustainable, the adaptation to climate change model from Royal Roads was actually published as a PDF. And again, we're now in the process of taking it apart and rebuilding it inside our platform, so that you'll be able to do things like create sustainable design badges. Or a big issue in Canada is how do you get social license with First Nations communities? That's actually and the interface with First Nations communities is a critical issue in Canada anyway, of how you build solutions to adaptation to climate change. So there's going to be many different badges that can get created there. I did have one sort of question back to the community that I was hoping to ask, and I know, Don, you had a whole slide on future things, but one of the questions, if I may, is what are the open competency models that would be most interesting to you and for your work?
So I've got that slide open if anybody wants to brainstorm.
Well, I can say that 21st century skills, there are a few frameworks out there that relate to that, but not, they're either proprietary. I can think of a couple of them that are proprietary. At Montana Western, we're using the AAC&U value rubrics, which aren't really meant to be used the way we're using them, but nonetheless, there just wasn't a good option for 21st century skills frameworks out there. So that's,
Great.
Yeah.
So, and that's actually going to be a theme for us. We're going to look at a lot of the transversal ones, the open ones first, and try and see if that can be a sort of fertile ground for like a bricolage idea for transversal skills that could fit particular context. That's a bit of a theme for us. So certainly looking at the value rubrics, those are awesome. They're fit at the bachelor, graduating bachelor level. So the other thing you could look at, which is kind of what Deakin did, is they've also bumped those up to the master's level, and they've actually dropped those down to 1-2 year certificate level. So it's worth looking at that. Maybe look at some of the work that Deakin has done in mapping to the Australian qualifications framework. That could be, more internationalized than that.
Yeah, I think
Take a look at that.
The one that Ali put into chat is also going to be super important. Sort of, and I'm going to put this in the design context because that's where I spend a lot of my time. Accessibility and disability.
Right.
The skills needed to develop for that are I think, a hugely important skill set that is, that is getting increasing recognition, but is not fully addressed.
Yeah, these don't have to be hugely important. I want to make that, they don't have to be like enormously widely shared. They can just be useful, and Ollie's come up with a really good example of that. So, and we could probably link that to the W3C, and he would have those frameworks that we can talk. And again, that's a way of making a claim. We think we're accessible. So that would be something that is potentially endorsable by others and can build value, build trust over time, that claim by an organization or a person. Any others? CEFR, that's a language framework. In Canada, we have the Canadian language benchmarks. I'm not sure whether IELTS, the sort of testing thing is a thing. That's probably more proprietary. Skills Future, Simone. Okay, thanks. That's great.
Yeah, I'm not sure how open that is, but I've heard good things about this the Singapore initiative.
All right.
Yeah.
That with a question mark. And
so I should say that Ibbaka is not opposed to hosting closed skill and competency models. We do that all the time for companies. What we do object to is doing it for free for someone who's not willing to share. So that's our sort of criteria.
Right. So there will be This is an open core model, right? So in other words, if you want to keep it open, et cetera, and if you want to do more sort of locked down things, more custom things, then let's talk. You know, that's similar to several other models out there, but there's a lot you can do in the open.
Okay. Are you going to provide an interface for anyone could basically come there and build his own framework?
That would be that's the governance thing, and we need to come up with terms and conditions.
But the answer to that is yes. We're going to, so we have a competency model design environment, and that will be, so we're still working some of the details out, but the basic idea is that anyone should be able to use that. So if you want to build a competency model for your own purposes and just use it on your own skill profile, you should be able to do that. And also in Ibbaka, anyone can have a skill profile at no charge as well. So our business model is we charge for connecting profiles, not for creating profiles.
Okay.
So yeah, and anyway, we can get into that later. But yeah, so we're going to have we are going to expose our competency model design environment. And we're talking to ONET about having ONET use that. So ONET has a competency model building tool currently on ONET, but they are looking to update that because it's a bit long in the tooth and doesn't fully support linked data in the way that they would like it to. So we are, in some very early conversations with ONET about providing that to them for ONET to use to build its competency models on.
Okay.
Because of it's the U.S. government, it would probably live on the Amazon U.S. government cloud, and not be part of the sort of general system. But yeah, that's dealing with the U.S. government, right? That as part of their part of the challenge of working with them.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm happy to facilitate a similar conversation with the ESCO team, unless you've already had direct contacts.
Great, Simone.
Yeah.
It's
a natural follow-up of what we started. I mean, mostly have been focusing on just advocating for connecting competence frameworks and digital credentials. So, I already presented on it, particularly on the Open Badge Factory implementation of it, which was great. So this could naturally fit as something else. So, and maybe when we follow up, I wanted to ask about just double clicking inside the skills definition. Maybe I'm thinking rich skills descriptors, the work that's been done at the Open Skills Network and so on.
Yeah, so yeah, we're following that as well. And I have a hard stop, I'm afraid, but I will follow up with people, and I can be found through Don and Eric as well. But thank you very much, everyone. I have to get to, and I'm chairing an open conversation, so I need to
a full minute to prepare. So good for you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Stephen.
Bye.
All right. So Simone, yeah, I'm happy to set up a conversation. I'll connect to you, and we can set up a dialogue. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for having hijacked with the conversation. This is way too interesting.
Just wanted to thank Stephen and Don for this very good presentation. And I want to say that it's very much related to the work we are doing now with Wiki Badges. So I invite you next week to the 9th to have a look on what is Wiki Badges. Wiki Badges is not about the competence framework. It's about having communities developing badge classes or badge content together. So it's very much related. So you see that there is kind of triangle. There is frameworks and Open Badge Factory, badges and framework, and could be basically also badges designed together, which could also point to frameworks. Or why not? Badges created in Open Badge Factory could basically nourish frameworks. So I think we are speaking a bit about the same thing. But I think what is interesting is to see that we are moving now from the badge created by one organization or the framework locked and controlled by some group to something more open and basically designed by communities. So I think it's the common ground here. It's collaboration, and if we speak about the skills of the futures, we can't go on with closed models. I think that we have definitely to open badges or frameworks.
Yeah, a little bit of water to help things flow.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you the 9th. I think it was also at 5 o'clock EET.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
this was very helpful. Just to chime in, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. I'm with ACTUA. We're out of Ottawa. We're a nonprofit that does a lot of STEM education. So we're just kind of dipping our foot into this field a little bit, but this is a lot of really valuable information. Don, I was going to ask, would you be willing to have another conversation sometime, just kind of generally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Best way. So Don at learningagents.ca, if you want to pick up the conversation, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'll send you an email here sometime soon, Don.
All right. Sounds
All right.
good.
Thank you so much.
Right.
All right.
Good.
Bye then.
Thank you.
So long, everyone.
Bye.